going to be looking at today has to do with this idea of quadratic equations and this arc pattern, which we typically call a parabola. All right? So before we go any further, if you could pull up the notes from today off of Schoology. Give you about 30 seconds to do that. All right. So this is just, you can pull this up on a blank sheet if you want to, but we're not doing anything with the notes just quite yet. But what I wanted to talk about today is this idea of quadratic equations and parabolas. So just kind of looking at this and looking at this on a graph, what kind of points do you think might be important for us to know? Yes? The x-intercepts. So here and here. All right. Where else? Yes. The y-intercept, which happens to be there. Anything else? So this is just one kind of example of a parabola. I could make another example over here and have it facing this direction instead. So the direction of the parabola might also be important for us. And another aspect that's going to be important for us, I'm going to draw it in green. It kind of overlaps right here with our y-intercept, but it's a point right here, or it'd be right here, which is kind of at like the point where the curve of our parabola is, and this is called our vertex. All right? So we have our vertex, we have our y-intercept, and we have our x-intercepts. And for the x-intercepts, we are actually going to call them roots. Right. So for these, if we look at this, these are 4 important aspects of what we are going to be learning with concerning quadratic equation and parabolas. And so if you look at the first page of our, well, I think it's like the 3rd page of the notes for you guys. It's this yellow colored one. You could get to this page here. You'll see that we have a parabola for us. And this parabola has pointed out a lot of the different aspects that you guys thought were important, and they are important, right? And so we have our x-intercepts, or our roots, we have our vertex, we have our y-intercept over here, and then we have something that we're going to get into a little bit later called our axis of symmetry, all right? And so for this, what we want to do with all this information is we want to be able to take this information and condense it into equation forms, right? But sometimes that's kind of hard to do. And actually, for quadratic equations, there are 3 forms of quadratic equations that we can use that will help us find different components of our important aspects of our quadratic equation, right? And so the first of those 3 forms, I'm just going to write up here. But before we do that, I want to kind of identify numerically what these points are, all right? So, for example, if you look at this, what point, what ordered pair represents where our vertex is? So take a quick look at your screen. You can zoom in a little bit. What point is that? Yes. 1, -4. All right. What about our 2 x-intercepts? Yes. -1, 0. And 3, 0. All right. And then what about our y-intercept? Yes. 0, negative 3. All right, so we have these 4 different points that are important for us. And right now, the first form that I'm going to show you guys is going to make use of this vertex. All right, and so this first form is called vertex form. All right, and so for our vertex form, it's going to look like y is equal to x minus, and then our x ordered pair, so 1, squared, and then we have a minus 4 over here. And if you think about transformations, that's basically just like a shift down 4. So we're just going to have that be a negative 4. So this right here is the vertex form of this parabola that we see here. All right? So vertex form, it's obviously called that because you can easily find the vertex, right? So if I gave you a parabola here and said, okay, this right here is actually 2, negative 10, how would you write that in vertex form? Who thinks they know what to put here? Looking for someone new. How about someone from this row here? Yes. X minus 2. All right. And then that's going to be squared. And then what are we going to put at the end? I heard you say, could you say it a little louder? Minus 10. Exactly. Right? So now we know how to write in vertex form. But there's something that you guys have been doing on your, was it the top 20s? If you have something like this, can you expand it? Can you FOIL it out? Why don't we take 30 seconds right now, try and expand this out. Great. So now that we've had a little bit of time to expand this, what did somebody get for their expanded equation? Yes.
X squared minus 2x.
X squared minus 2x minus 3. Is that what people got? Yes? Awesome. This is actually our second form. You guys already have it. This is called the general form. So a lot of times, this is the form that you're going to see our quadratic equations in. Right? From this form, there's one piece of information that has to do with our 4 important points that you can get from this general form. Look at it, and when you think you know which of these points you can get from it, raise your hand. I'm waiting for like at least 3 more hands. If you're like not 100% sure, it's okay. All right. All the way in the back, what do you think? Which one? The y-intercept. Exactly. So vertex form is important for figuring out the vertex. You can easily find the vertex. A general form, you can easily find the y-intercept. Why did you know it was the y-intercept? Exactly. If I put a 0 in here and a 0 in here, those are all just 0, so you have y equals negative 3. Exactly. All right. We have one more form, And this form, I bet you guys can arrive at this one by yourselves too. What is Mr. Server's favorite saying? You can factor it? You should. Do you think you can factor this one? I think you can. Take 30 seconds, factor it. If you're not quite sure, you can work with the person next to you. All right? I'll give you 30 seconds. All right. You've had a little bit of time. You've talked it over with your partner. What is the factored form that you got? One person tell me the first factor you got. Yes. X plus 1. What was the other factor? Yes. X minus 3. All right. This right here is our third form. And it is called the factored form. Right? So these are the three different forms of quadratic equations that we will commonly be using in this unit. Right? So we found in this first one, we can find the vertex from this. From the second one, we could find the y-intercept. What's left of our four important parts? I heard it whispered. I'm going to repeat it a little louder. Our x-intercepts. Our x-intercepts are -1 and 3. Do you see anything to do with -1 and 3 in the factored form? If y was 0, what would you get for our values of x? -1 and 3? So our factored form shows us our x-intercepts for our roots, right? So each of these three forms, there are pluses and minuses to each of them. Each of them will help you get a different type or a different one of our four different important aspects, right? So what we want to do now is, from these three forms that we have, we are going to look at this slide now, right? So do you remember at the beginning when I said the direction of the parabola might be important to us? There is something specifically about the direction, and it's whether the vertex is a maximum or a minimum, all right? And so if it's a maximum, or if it's a minimum, depends on the direction that the parabola is facing, right? So just looking at this first one here, what do you think? Is the vertex going to be at the maximum or the minimum? The maximum. What about the second one down here? Minimum. What about the third one? Maximum. If you look at the equations on each of these graphs, which part of this equation do you think tells us whether it's a maximum or a minimum? Yes. The negative. So if you look at this one, there's a negative right there. And in this one, there's no negative. And over here, there's a negative. So the negative makes the parabola face downwards. And it tells us, oh, this must be a maximum, right? All right. One other piece of information. I said at the very beginning, there's something called an axis of symmetry, and we'd get to it later. It is now later. So to look at the axis of symmetry, basically all the axis of symmetry is if we look at the vertex, it's basically a vertical line that goes through our vertex, all right? So in this case right here, our vertex was right down here. What would that point be? It's 0 something, right? -4? Okay. So this is 0, -4 here. If we want a vertical line that goes through the vertex, what is that equation going to look like? Take 10 seconds and write it down on your iPad. Who thinks they know what that equation is going to look like? Someone from this row. Yes. X equals 0. Why didn't we use y equals? Don't our equations usually start with y? If it's a vertical line, it's x, right? If we did y equals 0, that would have been this line over here. We don't want that line. All right, for these other two here, take 20 seconds, write down what you think the axis of symmetry is going to be for these two. And then once you are done, check with your partner. For this middle graph here, who can tell me what the vertex of this graph is? Somebody what was it? -1, 4. All right, and from that, somebody else tell me, what did you find for the equation for the axis of symmetry? Yes. X equals -1. That goes right through here. All right. What about for this graph over here? What was the vertex? Yes. We've got 1, -10. All right. And then what about the equation for the axis of symmetry? Yes. X equals 1. Exactly. Woo. Got it. All right. So all of this I know is a lot of information that we just kind of threw at you day one. Right? This is the big picture of what is happening for this unit. This is everything that we need to know about quadratic equations. All right? You will have the opportunity over the next week to continue practicing this. So please do not worry about it. But what we want to look at right now, let's see, we have one more thing, just kind of one more concept that we want to go over. All right? We said that our y-intercepts and our x-intercepts are important, right? But there are some instances when we're not going to have x-intercepts, so we're not going to have y-intercepts, right? So what we want to look at here is if we want to look at the axes, and we want to look at like how many intercepts there are on the graph. Just looking at this first one, how many intercepts do we have with the x-axis? 1. Where is it? I heard it from over here. Speak up a little more. 2, 0. So you've got our x-axis. For our x-intercept, we have 2, 0, right? Which is just right there. What about a y-intercept? What do we have for that? 0, 4. Good fix. All right. So we have 2, 0. We have 0, 4. So this one right here is our x-intercept. This one right here is our y-intercept. But didn't we always have 2 x-intercepts? Is it okay that we have 1 intercept? It's okay. Yep. What about for this second one here? How many x-intercepts do we have? 2? 1 right here, 1 right here. So this first one is -1, 0. What's the second one? 3, 0. All right. And then, do we have a y-intercept here? Yes. It's like right there. All right. And then what about this last one here? X-intercept? How many x-intercepts do we have? 0, right? All right. Do we have a y-intercept? Yeah. And so a lot of the stuff that we're looking at right now just has to do with if we have a graph. If we have a graph, can we find this information? All right. What we're going to do for the next 5 minutes is this is just kind of looking back at the 3 forms that we learned today. For all of these over here, all of these fit either into one of these 3 forms or it fits into the none category. All right? I'll give you a hint. This first one here, what does it look like? It looks factored, right? Yeah. It looks factored, but there's a -9 at the end. That means it's not really factored. So this first one here actually belongs in the none category. So I know you guys can't move these, correct? So if you would just like to write either a G for general, a V for vertex, an F for factored, or an N for none, take the next 5 minutes or so and go down through these and figure out which of the 4 categories you think it fits in. All right? And then after that, we will reconvene. So now that we are going through what people have gotten, what do people say for the second one here? Vertex? All right. What about for this next one? Do you have a guess?
General.
General? All right. What about this one right here? General? Does somebody have anything besides general? What did you have? None? So, this one right here. For people who said general, why did you say general? Yeah, so if we just added like a secret 0x, would that look like the general equation? Yeah. For people might have said something different. This one could also have been vertex form. Because if you look at this, if you have this x right here, and you change this x to an x minus 0 squared, would that give you the vertex?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this could be a general. This one could also be vertex form. All right? Either one works. This one, what do people say? Vertex? What about this one? General. General again? All right, let's see. Is this one vertex? Oh, I think we found our first factored, right? Yes? All right, what about this 2x minus 1? Who thinks general? All right, who thinks vertex? Who thinks factored? Who thinks none? All right. For this one, I can see general because if you said plus 0x squared, I guess that kind of works. You could also technically say none for this one because it's not really quadratic, is it? Right? So this one, you can say general or you can say none. What about these last two? Somebody I haven't heard from today, from Yes. Vertex? All right. And then what about this last one? Yes. Can you say it one more time? Factored? All right. Look over yours. Is this what you wrote down? And if not, think about why. But after this, we just have our homework. So if you want to pull up your homework, I will tell you which ones you can skip. Let's see. All right. I believe I have to click that. All right. All right. For these first 3, you can skip this middle one. Let's see. I would like you to do all of those, and these 3 will take you like 2 seconds each. So how about just this one You just have to do the first one for the minimum and maximum. And then this last one here, it gives us a lot of transformations. You guys have done transformations before, right? This is a really tricky transformation because it combines all of them at once. So let's figure out the equation together, and then you guys can figure out all of this by yourselves, right? So for this one, take 20 seconds, read it over first, all right? All right, now that we've read it, we know that we start with y equals x squared. That's our original function. What's one thing that we have to do to change this? Someone from this first row back here. What's just one of the transformations we need to make? Yes.
Vertically stretch by Vertex.
Okay, so if we're vertically stretching it, if we're doing a vertical stretch, does that mean we are actually using a 2, or does that mean we're using a 1/2? It's a vertical stretch. We're actually using 2? All right, so we have 2x squared now, right? What's the next thing we have to do? Someone from the second row here. What's the next thing I have to do? Sorry, could you say it one more time? Reflect it. All right, so if we're reflecting it, what does that mean about our equation here? Should be a negative. So now we have negative 2x squared. All right. The next thing we have to do is we have to translate it up to, so we're just translating it up to, right? If we're translating it up to, does that mean that we have to change what's with the x or what's outside of the x? Outside the x? All right, and then is it going to be a plus or a minus? Plus. So we have y equals negative 2x squared plus 2. All right, our next one, we're going to the right for. That one's with the x, right? Is it going to be positive or negative? So we have y equals negative 2 in parentheses x minus 4 squared plus 2. All right, and then last step is we have to stretch it horizontally by a factor of 2. Someone from this row right here, if we are stretching it horizontally by a factor of 2, is that a 2 or is that a 1/2? It's a 1/2? All right, and then where does that 1/2 go? Does anybody remember? Parentheses inside the parentheses. So we're going to have our negative 2, and then in these parentheses, we're going to put the 1/2. And then we're going to have more parentheses, so we have our x minus 4, and then all of that is squared, plus 2. That's a lot of transformations. But we have gotten our equation together. We have the equation, all right? That was half the battle. From this graph, what's a good way, if you're not quite sure how to like draw this freehand, what's a good way to like find points on here? XY chart. So make sure that you have an XY chart here. All right, and then if we're translating up to and going to the right for, what's our vertex? All right, think about it. If you think you have it, raise your hand. I saw people who were like just shouting it out. Now they're not raising their hands. Kind of bums me out. All right. For the people who are raising their hands and they know it, on the count of 3, just shout it out. 1, 2, 3. 4, 2. All right. The rest of the problem is yours to solve. This is your homework for tonight. All right. Work on this, and you have the rest of the period to do so. All right, and so that is all for today.